Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Megan, and I'm the Community Engagement and Events Manager for Aquifer. This is the second of 3 sessions on formative assessment and coaching. I wanted to run through a couple of things with you real quick if you're unfamiliar with this platform. If you're looking for closed captioning, you should be able to find it on the bottom of your screen, whether you're logging in from your phone or a computer, and look for a little keyboard button. If you need any help, just let us know in the chat and we'll be happy to help you. For questions today, there is a Q&A space for you to ask questions. You can also ask them in the chat and we can easily bump them over to the Q&A. We will give you time at the end to get your questions asked and answered. I'd like to introduce our presenters for today, Cindy and Joe. Cindy Lord is a longtime health professions educator and Aquifer volunteer. Cindy was most recently an associate professor with Case Western University School of Medicine, and just prior to that, she was the founding director of the Case PA program. Cindy has a long history of volunteering with Aquifer. She led the inaugural Aquifer PA task force that mapped Aquifer resources to Aquifer tools. She is now the PA Affinity Group Lead and the PA Student Affinity Group Lead. She is also a member of the Aquifer Peer Trainer Board that has been diligently working for the past year to develop tools and strategies to improve the adoption and use of Aquifer as a tool to improve student learning. In her role as an Aquifer peer trainer, she helped develop the Anyone Can Coach framework that will be discussed today. As Aquifer's curriculum integration specialist, Joe Miller supports programs and educators to more effectively use Aquifer's content. In this series of webinars, he will talk about our new formative assessment system, Calibrate, and how that can be used with coaching to improve student learning. And without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Joe.
Thank you, Megan. At Aquifer, it is our belief that every student would benefit from having a coach. So today, mine and Cindy's aim is to explore the invaluable role that coaching can play in shaping learning approaches for students. Cindy and I will introduce you to a practical coaching framework we've developed at Aquifer called Anyone Can Coach. As you might guess from the name, this approach is designed to streamline the implementation of coaching, the coaching mindset, even for educators that have relatively little experience with coaching. To begin this presentation, I want to discuss where coaching and feedback fits in the overall Aquifer system. At the first webinar in this series on formative assessment and Calibrate, I shared Aquifer's intent to build a holistic learning system where learners are given clear direction with targeted learning opportunities through Aquifer cases to go with engaging didactics at their program and patient encounters during their clinical rotations. At Aquifer, we envision a system where meaningful feedback and supportive coaching are available to all, and relevant data is delivered in a timely manner. For Aquifer to achieve this vision, we need to intentionally connect assessment and content. We need assessment that supports insights and generates useful feedback regarding clinical readiness and overall cognitive competence. For our system to be holistic, our assessments need to provide students some direction about what next. What do they seem to know, and where do gaps continue to persist? Should the students repeat cases connected to areas of struggle or find scenarios they have missed in clinic? What are their areas of strength where focusing their energy on clinical encounters will be more meaningful than cases or reading? Aquifer Calibrate was designed to support this type of student learning as part of a holistic system. And as a result, we have invested heavily in formative assessment because it has an impact, and the impact can be significant. As we noted in the last webinar, to have this impact, formative assessment must be deployed appropriately. When done thoughtfully, formative assessment can catalyze growth and development, reducing uncertainty and enabling focused, efficient gains in skills and knowledge. For formative assessment to have this impact, it generally must have the following characteristics: be low stakes, that is, it avoids judgment, focuses on feedback to improve mastery skills and attitudes, and empowers student self-regulation and reflection. We also discussed methods for deploying assessment that can undermine this impact. Key among these is using formative assessment to judge students versus using it to launch into a learning cycle. And from these pitfalls, we argued that formative assessment is a vital starting point to becoming a master adaptive learner that is acquiring adaptive expertise or the ability to apply foundational knowledge efficiently and innovate when faced with novel problems in the clinic. Adaptive expertise is increasingly important to address the rapidly changing nature of clinical work and health professions education. We argued that if students are going to understand their strengths and see their gaps as master adaptive learners must, they need high quality information about what really matters for clinical learning. They need assessment that prompts their thinking, that provides feedback that they can use, formative assessment that encourages learning and increases motivation, formative assessment that starts this master adaptive learner process. And as the authors of the Master Adaptive Learner Process note, it is not enough to just provide information to start the cycle, but also the context, including learner personal characteristics matter. These personal characteristics provide the power that allows the learner to enter into the process through and progress through the Master Adaptive Learner process effectively. In the author's description of this process, coaching is described as a rheostat that makes learning more effective and efficient. More effective and efficient because coaching is designed to directly impact these personal characteristics that are shown as batteries in the diagram. Batteries that make more effective master adaptive learners. And these personal characteristics, we will discuss those today and how coaching can accelerate the development of these necessary characteristics, including curiosity, resilience, mindset, motivation, and metacognition. The characteristics necessary to fully develop adaptive expertise. In a moment, I'm going to talk about coaching. Cindy and I are both going to talk about coaching and these personal characteristics. But before we go any further, let me introduce the structure of the this webinar. So our goal is to answer 3 questions. First, we'll discuss the evidence that supports that coaching will enhance the personal characteristics and competencies necessary for someone working to develop adaptive expertise. During this part, we'll briefly cover the research, but we'll also provide a comprehensive handout with the research support, so summarizing the research and with a bibliography. And then in the second section, Cindy will define what coaching for learning is. And the definition might challenge some of what you think of as coaching or some of what people tell you coaching is now. And finally, we will introduce you to Aquifer's Anyone Can Coach framework, which aims to allow anyone, even educators with limited experience, to apply the coaching mindset to encourage learning. We expect to talk for a little while, but leave ample time for your questions at the end. So let's get started with the benefits of coaching. So what does the research say about coaching's impact on these personal characteristics? Coaching can support the development of these characteristics or directly contribute to creating an environment where the student may develop these characteristics. Further, there's evidence that coaching can have a significant positive impact on learning. So let's review some of the key benefits as they connect to this master adaptive learner personal characteristic profile. First, coaching has been shown to increase behaviors related to curiosity and lifelong learning, including reflective practice, adaptability, and proactive learning. By promoting deep curiosity, coaching helps learners engage critically rather than just go through the motions of memorizing content. Second, studies have shown that coaching builds resilience through the development of self-awareness, mindfulness, stress management skills, and constructive responses to challenges. This resilience improves well-being and the ability to thrive under pressure. Motivation is the third significant personal characteristic. Motivation is crucial for long-term academic achievement. Studies have shown that coaching creates conditions that improve motivation, including goal attainment and self-efficacy. Fourth, by reinforcing dedication and persistence, coaching facilitates a growth mindset. This promotes embracing challenges, accepting critical feedback, and lifelong improvement. Fifth, coaching influences the development of metacognitive skills like goal setting, planning, and self-monitoring. This enables more deliberate and self-directed learning, which is necessary for master adaptive learners in search of adaptive expertise. And finally, coaching has been shown to reduce stress and improve job satisfaction, emotional well-being, and work-life balance. In summary, the evidence clearly demonstrates that coaching is an effective intervention in education, building critical skills, behaviors, and mindsets while improving well-being and performance. And at this point in the chat, it looks like Megan has sent a chat, and it connects to the handout for today's session. And the first couple pages of that handout summarize the evidence or the research that I just described in a couple of short minutes. And there's a bibliography at the end of the handout. The remainder of the handout will be referred to off and on by Cindy and myself throughout this. But now I want to turn it over to Cindy Lord, who's been working with Aquifer for over a year to deepen our understanding of coaching and help us develop our competency around this important skill and tool.
Well, thanks, Joe, and thanks for getting us started. So as coaching has captured the attention of medical education, it's finding its way into conversations. Invariably, someone turns to their experience as a coach. And more often than not, this experience is connected to athletics or the arts, such as singing or dance. But here's the thing, when we talk about coaching for learning, those types of coaches may not be the best comparison. Sports coaches often have a hierarchical relationship with their athletes where they provide instruction, motivation, and feedback. Think of a moment like the last time you watched a sporting event. How did that coach behave? May not have been what we really wanted to see, but they often insert themselves into the game and they may dictate many players' choices. So what is coaching for learning? A coach for learning is a thinking partner who works for the learner and with the learner to help them reach their best vision for themselves. A depth of thought, a set of tools, motivation, and accountability. A person who helps the learner move from where they are to where they want to be. Or from the medical literature, an academic coach is a person assigned to facilitate learners achieving their fullest potential by evaluating performance via review of objective assessments, assisting the learner to identify needs and create a plan to achieve these, and helping the learner to be accountable. Coaches help learners improve their self-monitoring while modeling the idea that coaching will likely benefit them throughout their career. In contrast to other types of coaches, a coach for learning focuses on the learning aim for a collaborative relationship with learners that results in more efficient and effective identification of the learner's strengths and gaps in performance, increases the quality of the learner's goals, and improves the learning strategies chosen to achieve those goals. The ultimate goal is for learners to develop the skills and competencies to coach themselves toward adaptive expertise, as Joe has previously mentioned. Structured conversations with a coach help support learning new, complex skills. At Aquifer, our core belief is that all learners benefit from the external perspective of a learning coach, particularly when trying to facilitate and amplify the development of adaptive expertise. So now let's dig deeper into what coaching is by answering three important questions. Who is the expert in the relationship? Who does the work? And who does the talking? To help gain a deeper understanding of the fundamentals of coaching to learn, you can check out the handout that Joe dropped into the chat. Included in that handout is a 6-question checklist around coaching fundamentals. So who is the expert? Well, in a coaching for learning relationship, one of the fundamental characteristics is that the student is the expert. For us as faculty, this is quite different from some of the other roles we're used to playing, such as mentor and advisor. And it's much different for the students as well. When students come to us for mentoring, they're used to us serving as experts. We've walked the path they're interested in, and they seek guidance and insight from our experiences. Traditionally, advisors help students with school or program specific needs, such as scheduling, job applications, and maybe letters of recommendation. Advisors often have a limited view of the student's strengths and weaknesses. In the case of a learning coach, faculty must find that they must adjust their perspective, sometimes markedly, to defer to the learner or student as the expert. The learner is the expert with respect to their values, strengths, motivations, and challenges. This is also a very different feeling for the learner, and learners may need help in making the adjustment, perhaps even more than we do. When we empower the student to lead, we show them significant respect that they know themselves and that they have the power to implement plans and change. I know what I'm describing sounds different and maybe even a little uncomfortable, but bear with me. We need to find ways to empower students to take charge of their learning, and this is an approach that can motivate that change. So, who does the work? In the learning coach model, the learner is the expert in the relationship, so they also do the bulk of the work. This means that the student is the one who identifies their strengths and gaps. The student is the one who sets the learning plan in motion, and the student is the one who checks in on success along the way. In short, when it comes to a learning coach relationship and a coaching meeting, the student should be empowered to set the agenda and do the work that's required. So, what is a learning coach doing if the student's doing all the work? A learning coach should focus on remaining curious about what's going on with the learner and avoid diagnosing their problem. And that can be hard to do. A learning coach asks probing questions to help see the student's strengths and gaps. A learning coach avoids jumping in and fixing the student's problems. The coach focuses on exploring possibilities as opposed to going in and helping the student fix everything. This may be the hardest part for both the educator and the student. We want to be fixers, and that's what students often expect from us. However, to develop master adaptive learners through coaching, we need to remain open to possibilities as opposed to prematurely focusing on just one idea. A learning coach works hard to empower the learner in the process. We can sometimes be quick to come up with approaches that work for us, which is not empowering the person you're coaching to solve their own problems. Ideally, the learners you're working with set the agenda and the focus and can identify what success looks like. The coach guides the learner through the process of setting goals and supports accountability. Learning coaches may provide affirmation and feedback, pose questions designed to evoke self-discovery, and help deploy goal-setting tracking tools. Well, who does the talking? Well, one way to check in on whether someone is coaching or not is to observe who is doing the talking. In a coaching for learning relationship, it's the learner that should be doing most of the talking. If the educator is doing a lot of talking, that probably means they're advising or mentoring. So the best way to stop talking is to just keep asking questions. Of course, coaching, mentoring, and advising all will overlap at times, and the behaviors of a coach are not rigidly defined. However, if faculty try to apply these attributes of a coaching mindset, the coaching relationship will be more effective. To help you determine if you're coaching to learn, use the coaching checklist on page 4 of the handout provided to you earlier in this webinar. Ask yourself the 6 questions on the checklist, and if you answer yes to each of them, you've adopted the coaching to learn mindset.
Great, thank you, Cindy. Paying attention to the coaching fundamentals that Cindy just described is such a great place to start. As noted on page 4, there's this brief checklist that you can use to reflect on your coaching after a coaching session, or in fact, you could use that checklist to prepare for an upcoming coaching session with a student. Ultimately, we want all of our students to engage in a coaching relationship with a competent coach. So what does it mean to be a competent coach? Well, effective coaching is grounded in key competencies that enable coaches to support student development. And because coaching has the potential to amplify our efforts to develop master adaptive learners, we should try to make sure that every learner is matched with a highly skilled and competent coach. Easy enough, right? Well, on the left-hand side of this slide, you can see the ICF, which is the International Federation for Coaches, Coaching Federation. This is their set of competencies, and there are 11 competencies there. And if you look at the competencies listed in the medical literature, they list 15 competencies. So easy enough, just 11 or 15 competencies that we have to develop to ensure that every student has a competent coach. Well, this was the problem that we were facing when we started to think about coaching as it connected our system together between formative assessment and cases for learning outcomes for students. We realized that the supply of coaches and ICF certified coaches was going to be pretty slim, and we wanted to find a way to get a smaller set, a set of coaches that could apply the learning mindset or the coaching mindset. So we decided that we would reduce the competencies if we could. And we identified 6 main coaching competencies. And for the most part, these are pretty similar, but we're definitely trying to develop, reduce down to the core. So the first one is establish a relationship. This is by creating an environment of trust, respect, and concern for the student. And of course, this involves demonstrating integrity, maintaining confidentiality, and championing the student's goals. The second one is to communicate effectively through active listening, asking open-ended questions, and using language that empowers students. Skilled questions reveal insights and facilitate awareness. And for those of you that are coaching or have gone through coaching training, you know that this competency alone is incredibly difficult to develop and takes a lot of time. But this is one we were thinking about deeply in this process, and Cindy will talk more about in the Anyone Can Coach model. And then the third one is facilitates new learning by guiding students in planning, assessing progress, and adjusting strategies. Coaches should evoke a goal setting and help identify appropriate resources. Fourth is ensures accountability or fosters accountability by having students restate their own goals and affirm their capabilities. Coaches maintain attention on what is important for the students to develop. And then these sort of reflective competencies, which is demonstrates professionalism. This is important for the coach to show up on time, prepared, serve as a role model, really try to avoid advising and remain committed to the coaching principles. And the last one is engaging in continuous improvement. And we'll talk a little bit about that at the very end for a brief moment, but that's identifying your own knowledge gaps and pursuing development opportunities. Coaches are constantly seeking to hone their own craft. And when students work with coaches who exemplify these competencies, it builds their capacity for self-coaching and equips them with valuable skills. Introducing these 6 main coaching competencies provides an overview of effective coaching. These competencies are intended to provide a description of what an effective coach can do. They are the bedrock of what we hope coaches will know and be able to do. And again, here's the thing. Even with these 6 competencies, which we went from 11 to 15 down to 6. The Aquifer peer trainers said that this is still too hard and wanted to develop a simple action-oriented framework for applying the coaching mindset without having deliberately and deeply developed these competencies. So the question was, could we get there? Could we distill this down even more? And this is going to be the last section of this webinar. Cindy and I will collaborate on this last section. And we'll describe how we came to this framework and how this can be deployed. But before we get started, I want to point out, sort of as my wife says, I'm very good at stating the obvious, but that coaching isn't just about techniques. It's significantly shaped by the quality of the relationship between the coach and the learner. While specific coaching techniques matter, the foundation of effective coaching is a trusting connection. And I think this is really important. When I was trained as a coach, they kept reiterating that having a good relationship mattered a lot, but they didn't dig into what that relationship was. So let me say this, because this is a really surprising finding when I read this. Contrary to common belief, successful coaching outcomes aren't correlated with similar personalities or interests between the coach and the student. So trying to match students with coaches that have similar interests or personalities likely is not going to improve the impact. So what does matter then? Well, the key elements for a successful coaching relationship include promoting learner agency and co-inquiry. This means empowering learners to take charge of their development and actively participating in their learning journey. Genuine interest and focus on the learner's needs. This means being vested in understanding and facilitating the learner's own growth and goals. Creating psychological safety. Any of you familiar with the work done by Google and the rework? Talk a lot about psychological safety. This means establishing an environment where learners feel safe to be vulnerable based on care, concern, and respect. In these environments, they're more likely to share what their gaps are and what their learning goals are. If they don't have psychological safety, they're more likely to seek out somebody that is more lenient in the process. And last is the balanced authority and friendly behavior. What this means is maintaining a support and respectful relationship. It really means being deliberate about avoiding the built-in dominance that educators and students often have because of the educator's experience, expertise, or position. Okay, so now that we've talked about the critical role of the relationship in any coaching, let's delve into the 3 phases of the anyone can coach model.
Well, thanks, Joe. To simplify the skills and competencies of effective learning coach, we've created the Anyone Can Coach model. The idea was to create an academic coaching program that equips educators at all levels with the basic knowledge and tools needed to excel as learning coaches. This streamlined 3-phase approach aims to make coaching accessible and effective for everyone. We will delve into the 3 phases and tools we've developed to support them in the coming slides. However, let me start by giving you an overview of the 3 phases. First is the evoke awareness phase. Coaches utilize active listening and powerful questioning to facilitate reflection, helping learners develop strong self-awareness about their strengths, weaknesses, and goals. Second, during the facilitate growth phase, coaches collaborate with learners to prioritize focus areas, create learning plans, and set achievable goals. And lastly, foster accountability phase. Here, coaches support learners by helping them set deadlines, making public their accountability plan, and offering support. With the Anyone Can Coach model, educators of all experience levels can implement the coaching mindset and associated tools to support learners in developing and leveraging the skills of the master adaptive learners. Different from the coaching competencies, which focus on what the coach must do, the Anyone Can Coach model is focused on student outcomes. Well, the first phase of coaching relationship is to evoke awareness. Doing this well launches a coaching conversation that is centered on the learner. This keeps the focus on their goals and empowers them to lead the way. It requires creating a safe and supportive space for self-reflection. We already discussed what an educator should keep in mind if they want to create a learner-centered space. In an environment of trust and openness, coaches encourage their learners to gain deep insights into their own strengths, weaknesses, and goals. This is important to identify blind spots. Coaching can help learners identify and address areas they may not be aware of, which can lead to breakthroughs in their personal and professional lives. Evoking awareness enables learners to make informed decisions and set achievable goals for personal and professional development. Developing awareness in the coaching relationship helps the learner to shift their focus from problems to solutions. fostering a proactive mindset that encourages growth and change. This enhanced self-awareness can enable a deeper sense of emotions, values, and beliefs. This understanding can lead to improved decision-making, better communication, and stronger relationships. When learners take ownership, they tend to be more accountable for their outcomes. Coaches aim to evoke awareness through active listening and powerful questioning. Active listening means showing empathy, understanding, and respect for the learner's thoughts and feelings. This fosters a supportive environment where the learner feels comfortable opening up and sharing their experiences, challenges, and their aspirations. It isn't just sitting there. You can demonstrate that you're actively listening by the questions you ask. Powerful questioning is the key to evoking awareness. The coach uses open-ended and probing questions. These thought-provoking questions help learners explore their thoughts, beliefs, and assumptions. These questions challenge learners to think critically, gain new perspectives, and develop insights. For more information and questions that you can use to evoke awareness, I refer you to the chat where you can find the link to the handout for today's webinar. We have some great questions there for you. So now let's talk more about powerful questions. I'm going to discuss the 5 types of powerful questions to evoke awareness with learners. And these are prompting questions, clarifying questions, reflective statements, interrogating assumptions, and general evocative questions. Each of these types of questions plays a unique role building rapport, deepening understanding, fostering self-awareness, and promoting a learner's growth. Let me give you a brief description of each type of question. Your handout includes a curated list of powerful questions for coaching that you can use today. This is a tool you can just take home and start using, and it covers each of the categories listed. So let's start with prompting questions. These are used to initiate coaching conversations and establish rapport, encouraging self-reflection and goal setting. For example, how would you describe your current goals or aspirations? Next, clarifying questions. These elicit more context and a deeper exploration, guiding learners to identify core issues and priorities. For example, tell me a little bit more about how you integrate the shelf exam blueprint into your study guide. Or sometimes I'll ask, it helps me to understand if you give me an example of how your self-test or how you self-test after each section studied. Reflective statements. These demonstrate active listening and provide opportunities for learners to confirm understanding or offer additional insights. Example statements to use here include, so if I understand you correctly, you're saying fill in the blank. Or you might try, from your perspective, it appears that fill in the blank. Next, interrogating assumptions. These challenge learners to examine the basis of their beliefs, explore alternative viewpoints, and consider the implications of their thought processes. Example questions here include, how did you decide on the format and information to include for each topic in your study guide? Or sometimes I'll say something like, can you identify any potential biases that could be shaping your assumptions? And then finally, general evocative questions. These inspire creative thinking, an exploration of new possibilities, and a proactive mindset for pursuing goals. Each of examples of evocative questions include, if you were to envision your ideal outcome or success in this situation, what would it look like? Or this is one of my favorites, what insights from your past experiences could you apply to your current situation? Remember, the key to effective coaching for learning lies in active listening, empathy, and asking thought-provoking questions that resonate with the learner's experience and goals. Use these coaching questions to support learners as they gain insight into their strengths, weaknesses, and aspirations. Now we move on to facilitate growth phase. In this phase, we encourage learners to make informed decisions about their personal growth. We want them to reflect on their learning strategies, evaluate their progress, and consider implementing new approaches to enhance their success. We want learners to prioritize areas, create a learning plan, and track their progress towards their goals. Coaches actively support learners through this process by assisting them in prioritizing, identifying effective learning strategies, establishing evaluation criteria, anticipating the impact of specific approaches, and refining their learning methods. Coaches guide learners in determining the best learning methods, refining them systematically, and staying updated with evidence-based strategies to optimize learning experiences. It's important to note that students have a set of learning strategies that they apply to every situation. Sometimes this is effective. However, the research has shown that students often do not effectively apply these approaches. So having something to share with them is quite helpful. One of my favorite questions in this phase is to ask the learner which strategies have been most effective for you in the past. This is a great place to start and to build from. I typically follow that up with, how can you build on those strategies? The key is not to just tell them to read more or do more Aquifer cases. We also want students to think about the strategies they're using. So to summarize, the facilitate growth phase, coaches provide guidance, resources, and support while using open-ended questions to encourage students to reflect on their learning strategies. You can find a list of questions that can be used to encourage students to reflect on their approach to learning on pages 8 and 9 of the webinar handout. These questions are designed to encourage students to reflect on their strategies. We've also included a handout of practical tips and effective learning strategies that can be shared with students. I really like going over, and this is on the right-hand side, the right side slide here. And I really like going over each of the tips and strategies on this handout to get a deeper understanding of the student's learning style. Well, we've arrived at the third and final phase of the Anyone Can Coach model, and that is to foster accountability. In this phase, our focus shifts to ensuring that our learners are accountable for their growth and progress. Fostering accountability is a crucial aspect of the coaching process that helps learners achieve their goals and objectives. Rather than a set of questions, we will share 6 fundamental principles that empower learners to lead, develop self-reliance, and build resilience to overcome challenges to achieve success. Now let's take a look at these 6 principles that are available in your handout that coaches can apply to foster a culture of accountability, ownership, and responsibility in a learner's and personal and professional growth. Starting with principle number 1, establish clear timelines. We do this to foster a sense of urgency, commitment, and proactivity in achieving desired outcomes. Implement this by asking, by when? Number 2, encourage learner-led accountability to cultivate self-reliance, self-discipline, and a strong sense of personal agency in achieving objectives. To do this, just ask, how do you plan to hold yourself accountable? Number 3, offer support without overstepping. This is to maintain learner autonomy and foster resilience, self-confidence, and a sense of ownership over their growth. Just ask, how can I help? But remember, you're not the secretary that reminds them or keeps track of them, sets calendar dates, etc. Number 4, schedule regular check-ins and progress reviews. This reinforces commitment, maintains momentum, and allows timely adjustment to action plans. It often helps to end one conversation at some point by asking, so when should we talk about this again? Number 5, celebrate success and learn from failures by fostering a positive and supportive environment that nurtures self-confidence, motivation, and resilience. If you know me, this is not surprising, but this is my favorite principle because I love celebrating successes with students. But it's more than just doing the woohoo dance. It's about reviewing in detail what they actually did that brought them that success. I tell students to bottle those strategies so they can use them again. Similarly, we learn from failures by analyzing what did not work and letting go of the strategy or modifying it. This can be hard for students since they sometimes need to let go of a strategy that they like or that they've used for a long time, even if it's not brought them success. As an example of this, is that I was coaching a student who did hundreds of test bank questions but did not improve their shelf exam performance. It turns out that even though they were doing lots of practice questions, they did them in the practice mode so they could read the answer and the explanation. The student consistently scored poorly on test bank questions, but reassured themselves that they were learning because they understood the explanations offered with each answer. The student never reviewed the question to see what information in the question they did not know, nor did they go back to study up on the topic to deepen their knowledge. They just did more practice questions with the same disappointing results. And finally, number 6, maintain a balance between support and challenge to develop problem-solving skills, resilience, and adaptability while providing a safe space for growth and learning. By applying these principles, coaches can enhance the effectiveness of their support, ultimately empowering learners to self-coach.
Thanks, Cindy. So we at Aquifer, we're strong believers that coaches can engage in continuous improvement as well, or should, on their own. And to that end, we developed a self-assessment that aligns with each of the 3 components of the Anyone Can Coach model that Cindy just described, and a relationship component. So there's really 4 parts to this self-assessment. This is included in your handout. You can download this, you can save it, you can change the name of it over time, retake it multiple times. But in short, what it allows you to do is it's an editable PDF, and you can choose, gives you some instructions at the top. It can ask you a number of questions in each area or has some statements and asks you to respond to those statements. We think this is really important just to keep returning to this model and thinking about how you're applying it, because nobody's applying any of this coaching perfectly every time. And so going back after or beforehand and looking at the self-assessment can really increase your coaching ability. So this is part of that process of continuous improvement. All right, so far we've, Cindy and I have argued that if we're going to accept the challenge to increase adaptive expertise by developing these master adaptive learners, that coaching can have a significant impact. And today we introduced you to the Anyone Can Coach model and gave you a set of handouts that can allow you to take on some of this coaching, even if you haven't had a lot of training. You do this by chunking the coaching engagement into 3 parts. And we really think about this, like Cindy and I have talked about this as this action-oriented model, which is where evoke awareness, facilitating growth, and fostering accountability are almost like 3 parts of an event. And these are the 3 parts of the Anyone Can Coach model. To get started, you can use these resources. You can select any questions on the evoke awareness, and then think about what you're going to do in the facilitating growth, and just reminding yourself what the fostering accountability is. And I can remember when I was training as a coach, one of the things that we kept getting drilled into us was to ask the question, and what else? And it's the simplest question, but it just keeps opening things up. And so that's a question that you should have at the ready. And then what in the accountability section, one of the questions that Cindy mentioned was the other one that kept coming up all the time, which is by when, because it's not a judgment question, but it opens the door to have a conversation about the students setting their own timeline. And so to get started, we just encourage you to start trying to review these resources and review them. I was recently chatting with a health professions educator that had completed a pretty intensive coach training, and he was using that with his students. So I asked him how it was working. And what he said was the students require insight into their problems. Otherwise, it does not work. And this is really key to coaching, because for a student to accept and benefit from coaching, they have to have a goal and know where they're starting from. And I just thought this is right on. And this is what connects this neatly to our next webinar, which is about coaching with formative assessment. Learners need to know what is worth changing to actively engage in a coaching relationship. So next week, we're going to actually boil this down even further and talk about a one-page coaching script that we built from this material. So earlier I said, we were trying to simplify the competencies down. And when we were done, we simplified the competencies and we talked about the Anyone Can Coach model. And the result was, I think we actually might need something simpler than this. And so we went through and really worked on distilling it and connecting it to formative assessment. So a set of questions. So it's a one-page coaching script that connects formative assessment to a series of pre-selected questions from the Anyone Can Coach model. And we're going to talk about that at next week's webinar, September 13th, which is on the screen now. I think at some point, Megan will drop into the chat the registration if you haven't already registered. But it's this point that we want to open it up for your questions, if you have any. I know Jack dropped into the chat a question about the similar personality and interests, and I do have the reference. I just wasn't able to multitask at that level, Jack. So if you email me, my email is on the screen right now. I'll send you that reference via email. I see we've lost Cindy's back. Any other questions? You can drop them in the chat or the Q&A. So one of the things that came up when we were doing our Calibrate pilot, the question that came up the most often was, how do I start a coaching conversation? So when you think about that, what's a good question? I know you mentioned one during your discussion, Cindy, but what's a good prompting question for a student when you're starting a coaching conversation?
So I like to also ask them what they're trying to get out of this. Where are they trying to go? And usually that is, well, I want to pass the test. I want to pass my, it's something very concrete. And so exploring that a little, tell me more about that. What does that pass mean? And, ultimately it becomes, I hear things like, well, I want to be a good provider. And, if I don't pass these exams and I don't learn enough in clinical, how will I pass my boards? How will I become a good clinician? So, they do have insight. You just need to draw it out. And that's why it's, I think, a kind of a process for me of active listening, just listening to what they say and then asking those simple questions. Tell me more about that. Help me understand that. I use that one a lot too. Help me understand. Explain that to me. Because they don't always know what those issues are. Just like when we talked about knowing what tools work, I have seen more students than not use the same strategies over and over, not getting a different result, but they've clung to them. And some of them because in undergrad they were successful or whatever, and they're just not successful now. And then the other is they've garnered, before they see you, trust me, they've group meet all their classmates and they've gotten, 40 other different opinions. And then they try using all of them and that doesn't work. So they're frustrated and they're scared. They're scared to make change. And so you have to kind of work through that. And you just have to keep digging down until they understand what their issues are, where their weaknesses are, and what their ultimate goals are.
It's interesting. You've brought up a couple of times students using the same resources, and one of the interesting things with the launch of the formative assessments that Aquifer has done piloting and now is available to our partners is that I've talked to some of the clerkship directors, and 3 of them have mentioned one of the interesting things that they've learned in this process of trying to coach students is they learned what students are actually doing with their study time. And they were saying, for them, knowing is really important, but it also feels somewhat intractable. How long do you think it takes in a coaching relationship to bring some insight to students with when maybe they're not following their growth isn't headed the right direction.
My favorite, how's that working for you? When they look at, here's like, I'll say, show me success. And, when that list is small, and show me where there's need for improvement or where you have had disappointment. I hate to say failures, but, where you've had disappointment, and that list is big. When they look at that, and you can go back to the success and say, let's dig deep into that, because, you don't want to really, you want them to focus on where they need improvement, but you don't want to harp on it because it makes them feel terrible. So I'm like, let's look at this success. Let's dig it. Let's dig through it. What did you do here? And it's about building confidence. Many of them, as confident as they seem, are not. They're not confident. And I think the other is breaking it down into small bites. As educators, we're feeling the same way. This webinar might be too much and feel overwhelming. Everything needs to be a small bite. So when you leave a session, I want them, like we want our educators today, to walk away with a tool they can use tonight, tomorrow. We want the student, the learner, to be able to walk away and be able to implore that strategy. And it has to be their strategy. That's the other piece that I think we stressed. It can't be what I say. Here, I've designed this big spreadsheet for you, and I've timed out all the things you need to do, and here's all the topics, and here's what you need to do. That works for me. It doesn't work for them. So it's being patient and finding and listening carefully what works for them, what has brought them success, boost them up with that, and then say, go and try some of this. Let's just do something easy. Take it home and come back to me. When do you want to come back? A day, 2 days, a week, and see if that works. See how that worked for you. You want to build on confidence and not make them overconfident, but build on true confidence and true success models, and they'll hopefully leave the other stuff. So there isn't a time. Everybody's different. Sometimes it's 1 session. Sometimes it's 5 sessions. Sometimes it's failure of 3 shelf exams. And they're like, yeah, that's not working anymore.
There's a question in the chat, which is, are there any strategies you can share that help coaches resist the habit of offering advice and mentoring instead of coaching?
Yes. And I would say the most important thing, and it trust me, I catch myself, it's about the talking. Just keep asking them, tell me more, because if you let them, they actually can share what they're doing, and you're trying to understand what their strategy is. So I don't know, whatever their note taking style or how they study topics, just keep digging deep. And then listen to yourself and say, am I controlling this conversation? If I'm talking too much, I'm not coaching. So it really, every time I can hear myself, because I get excited, right? When you're getting into it and you're like, oh, they're feeling it, they're picking up on this. And I get excited and just want, we want to share all our experiences. And just remember, they are the expert. And I say that a lot. That's how I ground myself. I'll say to them, remember, you're the expert here. I'm here to coach and support you, but you know better than I do. And when I say that, that grounds me into, remember, they're the expert. They know what works.
Yeah.
Kim's got a good comment there. Read Kim's comment.
Yeah.
Thanks, Kim.
Yeah, and it's probably true too that the Venn diagram of mentoring, coaching, and advising crosses over in the moment at times. But I think that self-reflection and paying attention to the questions you're asking is pretty key.
And I think, and I'm a PA, so most of us, unlike med school where there's tons of, there's just lots of people. I've worked in that system, but in a PA program, we're a small, tight group that wear lots of hats. We're the review board, we're the counselor, we're the shoulder to cry on, the advisor, the mentor. I think in a coaching situation, again, to create that psychological safety, you may have to repeat more than once. This is a coaching session, and I want you to know that you're the expert. You really have to create that space for them that you talked about, Joe, because they see us with, there's the hat, the program director hat. There's the they're on the review board, they're reviewing my progress, or, they're my mentor. I look up to them. And so you have to put the hat on and say, this is the hat I'm wearing. This is coaching and you're the expert. So I think it's important to you may feel like it's redundant, but it isn't, because they see you in many different ways.
Yeah. And I don't see any other questions in the Q&A or the chat. And so Megan has put into the chat the link for next week. So if you're still feeling like, oh, we have a 15-page handout with 2 pages of questions about evoking awareness across 5 different categories is still asking a lot. We'll distill it down to a single page next week, and we'll talk about that. So join us next week, sign up and join us next week, same time on September 13th. Yeah. Thank you very much. Thank you again, Cindy. Thanks,
Thank you.
everybody.